G'day everyone, my name's David Wayne. I'm the National Practice Manager for the Education Sector at Data3. Welcome to our webinar on modern management for schools. Most of you would have heard something about modern management in the past, modern management techniques like Microsoft Autopilot. Today we're going to take you into more of a technical discussion. It'll still be reasonably high level because there's only so much we can fit into a 40 or 45-minute session, but it's designed to give you some practical information to get you started on the modern deployment journey. So the session itself will be around 30 minutes with some time at the end for questions. So please use the Q&A section in chat to ask your questions during the presentation, and we'll go through them at the end with Noel, the presenter. So what we also intend to do is get your feedback at the end of the session on components that you'd like more of a deeper dive on. So if we get enough interest, we'll put together some follow-up sessions to go into a lot more technical detail on those subjects. Further, if you'd like a one-on-one discussion with Data3 about it, please reach out to your Data3 account manager after the session. So with that, I'll hand over to Noel Fairclough. Noel's our Principal Consulting on Modern Workplace. Thanks, Noel.
Thanks very much, David. And thank you for everyone today for joining the call. Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. So today's session is going to be about modern deployment, and I'll just kick on into the slides. Okay, so first up, just a little bit about me. My name's Noel Fairclough, and I'm the Principal Consultant in Data3. I look after the modern workplace practice. I specialize in Windows 10 and the deployment of Office 365 and Enterprise and Mobility Security Suite. I also do iOS and Android device management, and I've been with Data3 for 12 years. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Twitter, always posting updates about the modern workplace. So if you'd like to make a connection or just stay in contact, please feel free to add me on either of those links. So this will be the agenda for today's webinar. Hopefully everyone here is already familiar with Windows Autopilot and how it works, but if not, I'll still do a very quick recap of what it is. I'll then talk about how to get to Autopilot, how to get to an Autopilot ready state, and then compare some of the capabilities of SCCM and Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And we'll map the on-prem capabilities to the cloud. Finally, we'll go over some next steps that you can take to start your journey. So just a quick recap of what we're talking about here today. So this is the traditional way most people currently deploy a build image. Using System Center Configuration Manager or the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, we create a gold image using a task sequence process, and then we deploy this image using either Network Pixie Boot or USB boot media. This usually involves a full device wipe and a reload of everything. Occasionally, this base image will need to be updated with new drivers, new versions of applications, Windows updates, and even new versions of Windows 10. Using this method to deploy a build image is still a lot more convenient than the old days of Windows 95, if anyone remembers having to do that, or floppy disks, but it still has its fair share of administrative overhead. The build images need maintenance. The servers that you have to build your devices need to be backed up. Hardware vendors will, change chipsets or network cards in the middle of your procurement cycle, and it'll break your build process. And there's another thing as well. The devices can only be built if they're on site. So if they're off site, the user has to bring them back in or has to ship them back in. So traditional image deployment worked well in the days of Windows XP and Windows 7, and even in the early days of Windows 10, but it only works, in a certain situation. Now there's a better and more modern way to deploy a device. And that better way is Windows Autopilot. So Windows Autopilot is a user-driven provisioning process. From a user's perspective, they simply power on the device, select their regional settings, connect to a Wi-Fi network, type in their credentials, and the device will build from the cloud with all the applications, security, and compliance policy automatically applied. Once that's done, the device is at the desktop and it's ready to go. This method of deployment does not require any images to be maintained or any drivers to be updated, and it's as close to a full retail experience that the user would normally get if they purchased a personal device from, say, Harvey Norman. The only difference is the device is now provisioned to your school's IT standard. So this is a diagram of the autopilot process and how it works. And I presume many of you have seen this before at some stage or another. I won't go into too much detail, but I did include this in my deck because there was just a couple of things I wanted to point out. So autopilot supports a thing called self-provisioning. And this is where a remote device can be built or rebuilt with zero input from a user. This is ideal if you are using Windows Autopilot and you need to rebuild devices either in a remote location or perhaps classroom lab PCs, if you need to like rebuild an entire room overnight or over a weekend. Another capability I wanted to point out from this is that if you're using Microsoft Surface devices, you can perform firmware configuration changes during the provisioning process. So if you need to lock students out of making BIOS or UEFI changes, you can do that. At the moment, this capability is only available for Microsoft devices out of the box, but for other manufacturers such as Dell or HP, there are some workarounds that you can implement to do things like BIOS passwords or configuration changes, and you can make those happen during the provisioning process. And finally, with Windows Autopilot, devices can be either 100% Azure Active Directory joined, or they can join your on-prem Active Directory to end up in a hybrid Azure AD join state. Previously, in order to do the hybrid AD join, the machine needed to be on-premise with line of sight to a domain controller. So basically, you had to do the autopilot thing at school. However, Microsoft now have enabled a public preview capability for doing a device join to on-prem Active Directory using a VPN during the autopilot process. This allows the machine to become hybrid joined even when it's on a different network, like, for example, if the user is at home. So this is a capability that has been talked about for quite some time, and it's finally come to fruition. Okay, so how do you manage all of this? So you may have heard it called Microsoft Intune before, but now it's called Microsoft Endpoint Manager, or MEM for short. Endpoint Manager is becoming the focal point of all device management capabilities from Microsoft. Previously, you would have needed to manage your devices from the Intune portal if they were cloud managed, or from the SCCM console if they were on-prem. And then you had all these other portals as well. Like, for example, I had a different portal again for desktop analytics. Microsoft Endpoint Manager is simply the new name given to a redesigned Intune portal and brings all these capabilities under one roof. IT administrators can access all this information generated across all their on-prem and cloud environments in a single pane of glass. An additional capability that is also emerging is the ability to start managing your on-prem infrastructure from the MEM portal. So this was impossible to do before, but as Microsoft add more capability and further develop the MEM portal, you'll see a lot of the controls that normally had to be done on-prem come to be able to be done in the portal. And such an example is you can do machine and user SCCM policy synchronizations, and also application evaluation cycles for SCCM clients from the Endpoint Manager portal. Okay, so that was a quick brief recap on what autopilot is and how you manage it. So now, how do you get there? So just before we get to the stage where you can start deploying your devices using Windows Autopilot, you need to have them managed by Endpoint Manager. So there are two concepts here. There's cloud only, where the devices are joined directly to Azure AD, and then there's cloud attached, where it's joined to on-prem Azure, on-prem Active Directory as well as Azure AD, and that's your hybrid state. Now, if you don't have SCCM, so if you've made it this far and you haven't had to use System Center Configuration Manager, then you don't need it. You can go straight to Intune and leverage the capabilities straight away. If you currently have Configuration Manager, or there's a big investment in it, or if you're a massive school and you need to move a bit more slowly, then you can enable a capability called, you can enter a state called co-management. So this is think of this as a hybrid management state where the device is managed by SCCM and Intune at the same time. SCCM co-management allows you to move workloads between on-prem and the cloud, and it's not a one-way street. You can move a workload to the cloud. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you're not happy with it. You can simply move it back. It's that easy. So I'll give you an example. Say you have Windows updates, and you're doing Windows updates on-prem right now, but that doesn't work when the device goes home. So you can move your Windows update workload to Intune. So then when the device leaves the network, you can still deploy your updates. And you can do this with updates, compliance, applications. As long as the device has a internet connection, once it leaves the school boundary, you can still keep eyes on it and you can still manage and maintain it. Now, another thing people do is split the difference. So this is a more gradual approach to modern management, and you can ease the transition. So as a school, you would maintain SCCM for managing all your current on-prem devices and still build and manage them the traditional way. But then any new devices that you buy will go straight to Intune and be managed up there. So then as you retire your devices and buy new ones, you slowly make that transition to Intune. So that's another method that can be done. And of course, you can do this with both physical and virtual machines. So once you've enabled yourself for modern management, you can set yourself up for Windows Autopilot. So there's 3 ways it can be done. The first method is the OEM or reseller does the heavy lifting. They stage the devices on your behalf, and this is done through a partner agreement you have with your vendor. This agreement gives the vendor the ability to upload device IDs to your tenancy and pre-stage them on your behalf. There is also an option called Autopilot White Glove Service. And this is a capability where the vendor can preload your applications on the device before the device ships to your users or your IT department. This reduces the logon time for the user when they get the device, and it means that they are not waiting for as many applications to install. If you're handing out new devices at the start of the school year, this is a great time saver for that day 1 of onboarding. If you're an IT department and you're refreshing devices for redistribution for another school year, you too can perform this in-house. If you're not procuring new devices, but want to uplift your existing devices to be deployed through Autopilot, then option 2 is what you want. Once the devices are hybrid AD joined, you simply, which you can do through Azure AD Connect, you simply add them to an Azure AD group, and you create a Windows Autopilot profile, and you say yes to that option there on screen, which is convert all targeted devices to Autopilot, and that's in the profile settings. Any device that gets this profile assigned to them will automatically be converted and be ready for Autopilot deployment upon the next time they get rebuilt. Another convenient feature of this is if you get the devices back, like at the end of the school year, you can pre-provision the devices using the white glove service yourself. So when you hand the devices back at the start of the next school year, the onboarding experience is much better. And finally, the third option is manual registration. This is done by using a PowerShell script to generate a hardware ID in a CSV file. You manually upload that CSV file to Endpoint Manager, and away you go. You can start building using Autopilot that way. Manual registration is great for testing, or if you have like a limited number of devices, you're doing very low volume. It's not something that you would do at scale. So I'll just go over a bit more about the Autopilot white glove experience. What's on screen now is the traditional Windows Autopilot experience using the Windows 10 operating system. The device that's so this operating system is either installed on the device by the OEM or by the IT department. The device is then provisioned by the end user with the applications, settings, and policy. Now, depending on how many applications are being pushed down to the machine and the speed of the network, this can be minutes or hours. Now, this might be acceptable in circumstances like if a teacher is rebuilding themselves at home over the school holidays, or there may be situations where this is not acceptable, like on the first day of term and students are trying to get their devices up and running as soon as possible. So Autopilot White Glove enables an extra step to be performed before the device gets to the end user. Either the hardware vendor or the IT department can perform this step. It involves taking the physical device and plugging it in. At the first screen of the out-of-box experience, the Windows key is pressed 5 times, and this brings up an additional another screen with additional settings. You simply choose Windows Autopilot provisioning, and then the apps that are targeted to that device automatically come down, as well as all the policy and configuration settings. And this is typically your base applications, such as Office Pro Plus, right? Everyone gets Office, so you may as well just put it on every machine. Adobe Acrobat Reader is another one that people do. And any device configuration that you may need, like wallpapers and things like that. When all the apps and config settings are finished, the device is shut down and then it's handed to the user. The user then goes through the same autopilot experience, but instead this time they're only waiting for the applications and settings that are assigned to them. So this greatly reduces the onboarding and can be very useful for getting students up and running as soon as possible. Okay, if you are creating an autopilot profile, you can make the profile white glove enabled simply by selecting the option that you see there circled in red. Any device that's assigned this profile will know that they can be pre-provisioned using the white glove process. There are a couple of caveats though. First is white glove requires a physical TPM chip. So this will only work, this won't work with virtual machines. It'll only work with a physical machine. So if you want to test this, just have a couple of spare devices ready. Another thing to keep in mind is that this is only supported by using an Ethernet connection. This is because the white glove process is initiated before the connect to a Wi-Fi network screen appears during the out-of-box experience. So if you have a newer device that doesn't have an Ethernet port, you will need to use a USB to network adapter. Now, there are some ways around this. For example, you can actually create a Wi-Fi connection by opening up a command prompt during the out-of-box experience and establishing a connection to a wireless access point using the commands, or going into control panel, because you can actually launch that and connecting that way. Now, excuse me. Now, establishing the Wi-Fi connection, it will work, but it's not supported. Okay, it's technically not supported. So it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you shouldn't. But if you're in a bind or you've misplaced your Ethernet adapter, it's a method to keep in mind. It's just not as convenient. Okay, so here's a short video of the white glove process. So from the out-of-box experience, we press the Windows key 5 times and we select Autopilot White Glove Provisioning. Now, during this process, the steps are outlined there on the right-hand side, steps 1 to 5. So the vendor or the IT department have uploaded the device IDs to the tenancy. Here we go, we're just confirming the white glove process to be started. And we have some Azure AD dynamic groups that pick up those devices. The device, during the white glove process, the device does a phone home, and it's because it's in the Azure AD groups where applications and policies are assigned, it picks those up and it brings those down. So here we can see the device preparation step is being completed and the device setup process is being completed. So this happens in the IT department or at your reseller's premises before the device gets shipped. And you can see here, like, we're installing apps, 4 of 8, 5 of 8. All these apps come down, and this basically pre-builds the machine. Once all the applications and device targeted policies have come down, we'll get a green screen to confirm that the white glove deployment was successful. That will come up in just a moment. And then we simply click the reseal button in the bottom right, and that basically does a sysprep and shuts down the machine. So now all the device targeted applications and policies have now been preloaded. So now the device then goes to the end user, and the end user unboxes the device, turns it on, and then they go through the normal autopilot process. So they turn it on, they select their regional settings, and then there will be a screen here where it'll ask them to connect to a Wi-Fi network. This video was recorded in a virtual machine, the actual provisioning of this, so that's why we won't see it. But the user will enter their login credentials, their password, and so this authenticates them against Active Directory or Azure Active Directory, and then this actually logs them in to Windows 10. So we'll see some screens in a minute that you'll be familiar with if the first time you log into a Windows 10 device and it sets up a new local profile for you. So here we go. So it's just logged into Windows 10, and then the user will be presented with another enrollment status page, and then only the security policies and the apps specific to them will come down. So they're not waiting for the device preparation and the device setup stages to complete. They're only waiting for the account setup process to finish. And then when that finishes, which will depend on how many apps are actually specifically assigned to them, the device will end up at the desktop and it's ready to go. Just like that. So it's a short video to give you an idea, but hopefully you get the concept. Okay, so now let's talk about how the on-prem capabilities that you're familiar with, such as SCCM and group policy, map to a cloud-enabled world of modern management. And something many people worry about, if they can do like for like as they go all in with the cloud. So this is how the current on-premise capabilities map to the cloud world of modern management. Everything you can do on-prem, you can also do from the cloud. It just might be called something different. So for example, device provisioning in SCCM or MDT, you use a task sequence with a WIM image. In Endpoint Manager, it's Windows Autopilot and it uses the existing OS. For application deployment in SCCM, you target collections. In Endpoint Manager, it's Azure AD groups. Now, one thing I wanted to point out, and this has just happened recently, is if you've ever played with Azure AD dynamic groups at the moment, a lot of the attributes that you can pick and choose from to group devices or users together, it's a little bit limited. You can do a lot more in SCCM. You can build very complex queries in SCCM, and there's a lot more capability. In the more recent versions of SCCM, you can actually synchronize on-prem collections to Azure AD groups. So if you're using SCCM and you need to, find certain devices with a particular type of BIOS version or something like that, you can build that query in SCCM, get all those members in a collection, and then synchronize those members up to an Azure AD group if you need to target those specific devices from Intune. So that is a capability that exists now. For Windows updates in SCCM, it's called software updates, Endpoint Manager, Windows Update for Business. Compliance settings are device settings. Group policy. So everyone will be familiar with using group policy to do device and user configurations on-prem. You can pretty much do everything you can now in group policy from Intune using the policy CSPs, which is policy configuration service providers, and OMAURI, which is Open Mobile Alliance Uniform Resource Identifier. So if you've ever had a look in Intune and you look at the GUI and you see the settings that are presented in the GUI, that's only a fraction of the actual capability. Microsoft just present in the GUI what they think most people will want to do, but you can actually create custom settings, and there's hundreds, literally hundreds, maybe even 1,000 plus settings that you can do in addition to what's just exposed through the GUI. For reporting, you've got SCCM reports in SCCM. In Endpoint Manager, you've got the Intune Data Warehouse, and you connect to it using Power BI. You can use the free version of Power BI, that's no problem. For application self-service, so if teachers or students want to install apps themselves, it's the Software Center in SCCM. Endpoint Manager is the company portal. Both products have the ability to make applications available or required. So available is, it's up to the user to install it whenever they want. Required is you're going to get it whether you like it or not. Now, finally, the big thing, software distribution. Now, SCCM has distribution points, which is very handy because the software stays on-prem, and if someone's installing it, then it pulls it from local servers, so you're not smashing your internet connection. Endpoint Manager has Microsoft Connected Cache and delivery optimization. So Microsoft Connected Cache is an on-prem distribution point that can host application data and Windows updates from Intune, and delivery. And if you don't want to do that, you can use delivery optimization, which will reserve a small amount of disk on every machine in the same subnet. And then if a machine in that subnet needs, say, Photoshop or whatever, it'll ask machines on the same subnet if they have a copy of it first. And if they do, then it will pull it from there. Now, at the moment, Microsoft Connected Cache can only be installed on a SCCM distribution point. That's right now. They are enabling the capability very soon in the future where you can have that standalone. So if you don't have SCCM at the moment, you'll be able to, and you don't need it, in the not too distant future, you'll be able to spin up a Microsoft Connected Cache distribution point on a Windows file server or a Linux server. So you can have that on-prem. So, as you deploy applications from Intune, you're not hammering your internet connection. So where to from here? So this roadmap, the roadmap to get to modern management is not as complicated as it seems. The very first thing you need to do is to get your identities into Azure Active Directory. Most, if not all of you, probably have already done this because you're using things like Office 365. And if you've already done this, then the first step's already complete. Next, take an inventory of your applications and use this opportunity to retire any legacy apps that have been hanging around and you want to get rid of. If you currently deploy applications using SCCM, you can use the exact same content and the install command lines to deploy them from Intune. This makes it really easy to get apps into Intune. You just literally copy and paste the installation command lines and the detection methods from SCCM. If you have apps that use like a setup.exe file, they'll need to be repackaged, but you can repackage them using the Win32 app packaging tool from Microsoft. It's free, it's command line based, and it's really easy to use. You just put your source files in one folder, you have the tool, and it's just a command line input, output, and it generates an Intune Win file, and then you upload that to Intune. It's easy as. Then take an assessment of your current group policy configuration and only move what you need. Approach using modern management with a different mindset than you would with on-prem management. There's no need to micromanage the endpoint anymore. Stay secure, but keep it simple and leave low-value customizations behind. And a good way to work out if you need to keep a setting is ask yourself these 3 questions. Does this customization enhance IT security? Does this customization protect the school's brand or reputation? Does this customization empower the user? If it can't answer yes to one of those questions, ditch it. You don't need it. So if you have SCCM, enable co-management. It's really easy, and you can start moving workloads between on-prem and the cloud. Co-management is no longer a bridge just to get to Intune. It can be a permanent state. A couple of years ago when co-management first came out, they touted it, the way they were marketing it was the bridge to get you to Intune with the idea that you would eventually turn off SCCM. You don't have to do that anymore. It can be a permanent state. If a hybrid setup is what works for you, then you can keep it that way. If you don't have SCCM, then you just need to hybrid join your devices, and you can start managing them from Intune. Configure your autopilot profiles. These profiles determine the onboarding experience for the user, such things as whether or not there'll be a local administrator and what prompts they might see. This is where you also get to choose if autopilot white glove will be an option, or if the autopilot experience will be user-driven or self-deploying. Finally, well, almost finally, establish an agreement with your hardware reseller to pre-provision devices using Autopilot White Glove. If they're a Microsoft partner, such as Data3, this can be done very easily. Then any future devices that you purchase can be built most of the way before they're shipped out to you. Once all that's in place, you're ready to deploy, and the device just follows your normal asset lifecycle process. Okay, so this is the last slide. So some useful links to start your autopilot journey. The first link at the top is a treasure trove of good advice. Michael Niehaus is the principal program manager at Microsoft, and he is a principal program manager at Microsoft, and he owns Windows Autopilot. He runs a blog site with lots of tips and handy hints on troubleshooting. His blog site's called OOF Hours. I'll keep saying off hours, but it's OOF Hours. And that link that I've put up there has some information related to how to set up the VPN to perform hybrid Azure AD join. But you can just go to oofhours.com and you'll see all the other information on his site. Really great tips, troubleshooting, how to do things the right way, where to look for if something breaks, where to start looking for stuff like that. It's a great site. I look at it all the time. The Desktop Deployment Center contains a lot of good Docker and methodology on how to make the transition to modern management. It does cover some stuff on Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration, but apart from that, a lot of the other content on how to set up your network, how to do your apps, it's all on there. It's fantastic. The third link there has some specific information about for IT admins regarding Microsoft 365 education. And that final link down the bottom is what's new in Microsoft, in Microsoft Intune, and it's updated every week. This is a very handy site to keep checking to see what new features and capabilities are being released and what's being roadmapped. And with that, I'd like to thank you for attending today's session, and I'll open up the floor to take some questions.
Great, that's great, Noel. Thank you very much. We've had a few questions come in. Just for everybody's benefit, we have recorded this session, and we'll send a link to the recording and a copy of the slides around to all registered participants, of which I think we're well over 100 today. So we've had a great lot of interest for this particular subject. Just to go through some of the questions, please keep those questions coming. We've got a little bit more time to answer more. The ones that have come through so far, Noel, can we use Intune or Endpoint Manager to manage on-prem servers?
No, not at this stage. At the moment, Intune can only manage Windows 10. It can do light management of Mac OS, and it can manage iOS and Android. So no server operating systems at the moment.
Okay, thanks. I think you just answered the second question too around support for Mac OS Bootcamp. So is that supported, or Bootcamp Windows?
That's a great question. I've never done that before. I don't know. That is a scenario I have never actually tested.
Good to see
Yeah,
we're pushing the boundaries today.
yeah, no, that's a great question.
That's an anonymous one, that one. So if the person that's asked the question would like to give us their details or shoot us an email, we'll do some digging into that and we'll get back to you on that one.
Yeah, I actually, I actually think it would work because the phone home, where Windows 10 does the phone home to see if it is autopilot, if it is an autopilot device, that's part of the operating system. So yeah, I actually, I'm 75% confident that might actually work. So yeah, it'd be an interesting scenario to test.
Cool. Thanks, Noel. Next question from Matt. If we have a firewall that requires logins, will the white glove process work correctly, or does it require an active open internet connection?
Yeah, it does require an active open internet connection. So if you're doing the white glove service using an Ethernet cable, then it's just expecting to be able to talk straight to the internet. If you do the workaround where you open up a command prompt and authenticate to your Wi-Fi, obviously then you're authenticating to your Wi-Fi and you'll get access to the internet. So a couple of options there. You either have a dedicated link, Ethernet link, which is shared through a switch for doing the white glove process on-prem, or you just drop to a command prompt and bash out a command to connect to your wireless network, and then you can continue the white glove process from there. Just one thing as well on doing that Wi-Fi step. Even though it's not supported, you can do it. It does actually work. I've never had problems with it. It's just that if you did run into a problem and you did contact Microsoft for support and you told them that you were doing it that way, they're going to say to you, can you use an Ethernet connection? But in all fairness, it works just fine.
Great, thanks, Noel. Next one from Anonymous. Can I assume this relates to the autopilot build process, but can you preload regional selection?
No, I don't think you can. I don't think so. Yeah, because it's part of the out-of-box experience. I don't believe you can.
Okay. Next one, again from Anonymous. Where can we get the packaging tool?
Oh, just do a Google search for Intune Win. So INTUNE one word. And the very first link that comes up where it says add and assign Win32 apps to Intune. If you click on that, it'll have a link in there to the Microsoft Win32 content prep tool, and that's what you want.
Thank you. Another one from Anonymous. Do you know if we'll be able to see what groups a device is part of in the future? As far as I'm aware, there's no way to see the group's device as part of the device panel. You have to go to a group first and see if it includes the device instead. This makes it hard to find out which different groups a device is part of.
Yeah, good question. That's through the GUI. There might be some way to do it through PowerShell or the Microsoft Graph, where we can get a device object and maybe do some interrogation to see if it's a member of groups. Just because it's not displayed in the GUI, it may be displayed in the Microsoft Graph. It's something I haven't done yet. I'd have to check that.
Okay. Next one from Mike. Are there any benefits in having a hybrid AD connection over Azure Online only?
The only reason you'd really have a hybrid AD connection is if you still had things on-prem that you needed to access. For example, if you had some applications that ran on-prem, or some services or facilities that still needed on-prem Active Directory, and your machines had to be part of that Active Directory to be able to talk to them. That's really the only reason I can think of that you would need. Even things like printers now, there's Azure Universal Print, so you can set up your printers in the cloud and print on-prem printers. If email, and if you're using Exchange Online and your data's in SharePoint and all your apps are cloud enabled, yeah, there's not much of a reason I can think of to stay with a hybrid AD join.
Thanks, Noel. Next one from Andrew. Can we use the white glove service on non-Microsoft devices?
Yes, you can. Yep. So yeah, you can use the white glove service on any device that's able to be auto-piloted. So as long as it meets the prerequisites of having a TPM chip, yes, you can do it on HP's, Dell's, Lenovo's, Microsoft devices, whatever.
Thank you. The next one's more of a comment. Scott said Boot Camp probably won't work because it doesn't have a TPM chip.
So the TPM requirement is just for white glove. So and the reason for that is because there's it's like a trust thing, because when the device is white glove, there's no user authentication, so we have to be able to trust the machine, and that's done because we pre-stage the hardware ID of that machine. For actual just plain autopilot without white glove, that can be done on a virtual machine. It can be done on well, as far as I know, any Windows OS. So, which is why I think the boot camp, you won't be able to white glove the boot camp scenario, but you might be able to do just a pure autopilot experience.
Cool. All right, another one from Anonymous. Since a user's Microsoft account is used to configure or provision a laptop, can multiple users use a laptop which is configured using this method?
Yes, so there is a shared PC scenario that can be set up using autopilot. So yeah, that's quite capable. That's quite possible to do that. The user identity that's used to provision the laptop is the first identity that signs into it. But once that device has joined Azure Active Directory, or even your on-prem Active Directory, that machine can be signed out, and then another user can sign in. If you allow that, of course, you can have another user sign in, and you just have like a shared laptop or shared device scenario.
Okay, next question from Evan. What does Lite support for Mac OS include?
Lite, good question. So basically, you can't do like application deployment or anything. If you need to run scripts or do application deployment or any of that heavy customization, you need Jamf. For Intune for Mac OS, the device is registered to Azure Active Directory and then managed by Intune. It allows you to ascertain compliance on the device. So if you have any conditional access policies, and because it deploys the company portal, you can advertise applications to be available to that machine. But if you need to get any of the serious stuff done, then it does actually need Jamf. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay, next one. Does policy configuration include dynamic local user for shared devices?
Does the policy configuration include dynamic local user? I'm going to need a bit more context on that one.
All right.
So,
well, if Anonymous can send through a little bit more detail, we can expand on that one. In the meantime, I'll go to the next one. Deploying large applications like Autodesk Suite or Creative Cloud has been difficult in the past. Is this any better?
So there used to be a 2 GB limit on, there used to be a 2 gig limit on applications that could be deployed to, uploaded to Intune. That has now been expanded to 8 gig, but it may have been increased more than that since then. So I have had, when there was the limit in place, you're right, it was a challenge, and there were some workarounds that weren't fantastic, but they worked. The workaround was to have the application source on a file share locally, and then instead of pushing down the app, we would run a PowerShell script, push the PowerShell script down to the device. The PowerShell script would say, hey, map to this network share, run this executable with this command, and then it'll do a silent install from local media. With the new capabilities now with Microsoft Connected Cache and delivery optimization, you may not have to do that, but if the application is absolutely massive and it's bigger than 8 gigabytes, then yeah, you may still have to do those workarounds. But yeah, it is an area that could be improved, and I think it has improved over the last couple of years.
Okay, well, the questions are still coming in thick and fast, Noel. You've still got a few more minutes?
Yep, sure.
Next one is there a way to automate tasks once the user gets to the desktop? For example, is it possible to automatically sign into Outlook and approve the license automatically into Teams, OneDrive, etc., even Google, Chrome, Adobe, Creative Suite, etc.? All of these use the same Office 365 SSO login details. We do these steps for the school-owned devices for students, and they take more work from us than imaging the machines.
Right. Yeah, so the single sign-on process should work. I'm not aware of a way to automatically sign in to all the different applications on the user's behalf. Yeah, I haven't had to do that yet. I don't know of a way where that can be triggered. There might be a way through application policies where some of the capability might be able to be done, but I don't think there's an all-out thing where it can automatically log into Teams, log into OneDrive, log into Outlook, and it all just uses the single sign-on token, and it all just happens on behalf of the user. So the short answer to that is I don't think so.
Good to see some tough questions coming in, Noel. You're normally pretty, yeah.
These are great.
Another one from Matt. What would be the best method to deploy an on-site lab, shared devices as opposed to assigned devices?
For a lab, it would be shared devices, I'd say.
Okay, pretty straightforward. From Dan, if the manufacturer...
Sorry, I'll just add a bit more context to that. So in Intune, there is a shared device profile that can be pushed down, and in that profile, there's certain settings that you can configure. So if multiple user IDs are using that machine, you can partition off the data so one person can't see the other person's data, etc. So there's a whole bunch of settings that can be configured, and then that's a device configuration profile, and that can be pushed down to your group of lab devices.
Okay, next one. If the manufacturer forgot to add your devices into your Intune before they ship them, what do I need to do to get my new devices into the console? This is assuming that the ICT department is performing the autopilot service.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So for schools to be able to get devices into the autopilot tenancy themselves, there's really only two ways. There's either getting the hardware hash off the machine itself. So you could do that using a PowerShell script. So that would involve having to unbox each machine from the out-of-box, turn it on from the very first out-of-box screen where it says, what country are you in? There's a key combo you can press, things like Shift F10 or something, and it opens up a command prompt, and then you stick in a USB key with the PowerShell script. You run that, you get the hardware ID, and then you can upload that to your tenancy, and then that stages the devices. The only other way would be to either manually, run up the device, get it joined to your domain, and then do that option where you can convert the existing devices to autopilot. Now, the reason for that is because hardware vendors, so Microsoft partners, have a special capability, which is just for them, where they can use the make and model of a device. So when the hardware vendor pre-stages the device for you, the devices get, in the warehouse, they just run around with a barcode scanner and they just scan the side of the boxes with the serial number, so make, model, serial number, and that automatically gets uploaded. And the reason hardware vendors have that capability is because if everyone had that capability, you could literally just run around a Harvey Norman and scan devices and tie them to your tenancy. Because once a device is tied to your tenancy, it's there forever, which is another good thing about autopilot, because if a device gets stolen, if someone, even if they format the hard drive and they reinstall Windows on it, once it goes through that out-of-box experience, it's going to do a phone home and it's going to want to log back into your tenancy. So the only way around that is if they, change the motherboard or something and change the actual hardware ID. So yeah, short answer is yeah, if the vendor forgot to do it, I personally would call them up and make them do it. Or get one of them to come out and scan the boxes with the barcode reader and get them to do their job properly. But if you haven't got that luxury, then the only other way is yeah, probably through the PowerShell script.
Cool, thanks, Noel. Another one from Andrew. Is there a way to assign device names in the autopilot process?
Yes, there is. So for pure autopilot, so you can use the serial number of the device. So you can have either prefix or suffix letters and then the serial number. For hybrid joined devices, you can't do this. So you have to use a random name, and it's really strange, and it's something that I've been wanting them to fix for a long time. So if you have a machine that is hybrid joined, it can only get a random computer name, which doesn't make a lot of sense in a school environment. However, what you can do if you have SCCM is you can then configure a SCCM baseline policy to look for these random names and say, oh, if you're a computer and you have a name that doesn't match this formatting, like, maybe serial number or laptop dash number, run this PowerShell script to rename to the correct format. And then that's how you bring all the machines in line if you have a hybrid join scenario. But for pure autopilot, yeah, you can either use random name or serial number. Most people use serial number. It just means it might mean a change of the naming convention used.
Great, thanks, Noel. Just a reminder to everybody, please give us your feedback. You'll see in the Q&A section, there's a link from Caitlin to give us some feedback on today's event, and also nominate areas where, if you would like a deeper dive on any of this stuff, we're happy to give up more of Noel's time, and Noel's really happy to do this for us, which is fantastic. But we need to understand what you'd like to hear about. So please provide us with that feedback, and we'll get back to you on that one. A couple more questions, Noel. If we've got, I think, about 4 or 5 minutes left. Can you add a local admin user for IT support in the setup process?
Yes, so there's a couple of ways you can do this. The most elegant way is to use Azure Active Directory. So in the Azure Active Directory portal, under devices, off the top of my head, devices, device settings, there is a field in there where you can add IT admins to be local administrators or admins of all devices that are hybrid, or sorry, all devices that are Azure AD join. And that means, if they're hybrid join, obviously you do it through your domain controllers and whatever. But if it's just Azure AD join, you can add users in there to IT admins to be administrators of every device that's Azure AD joined. Another way that can be done is you can use a PowerShell script to create a local user account on the machine, and that'll actually create a proper local account. And the difference is, I guess, is if you're doing it through the Azure AD way, it's always enforced and it's always implied through Azure AD. But the local account, if the user manages to get in there and tinker with it or whatever, they can mess with it. But there are a couple of ways to do it.
Okay, and the final question, actually, this is two different questions from Alan and Evan, but I think they're related. Can a school sell off an old device that has been autopiloted? And how do you end of life lease devices if they are tied to your autopilot instance?
Yes, you can. So, when the device ID is uploaded to your autopilot tenancy, it's obviously always tied to your tenancy, and if it gets stolen or whatever, it'll always do the phone home. If it's end of lease and you need to retire the devices or donate them or whatever, it's simply a matter of going into the devices section in the Windows enrollment part in Endpoint Manager and deleting the devices out of there. Once the device has been deleted out of that section, under Endpoint Manager, Devices, Windows Enrollment, and then on the right-hand side, it's Devices. Go into there, you'll see all your devices, delete it out of that section, and then it's a free device. It can be donated, reused, sold, however you want to dispose of it.
Fantastic, thanks, Noel. Any final questions, everyone? We've got a couple of minutes left. Otherwise, we'll wrap up. Just another reminder to give us that feedback in the Q&A section there. There's a link from Caitlin. Please give us your feedback. It's really important for us to understand how relevant you thought the session was and what else we can do to help you on your journey to modern deployment. I think another one's just come through. I assume devices can be re-tenanted at the end of lease.
Yes, they can. So as long as they're deleted out of one tenancy, and then they can be re-imported into another tenancy. Here's a fun fact. If you import a device into one tenancy and then you try and import that device into another tenancy while it's already still a member of the first one, the import will fail. You'll just get an error when you try to import the device. So that's another way to know that the device hasn't been properly released yet from its original tenancy.
Great, thanks, Noel. One last one before we wrap up. How do you end of life lease devices if they're tied to your autopilot? Oh, I think we've covered that.
Yep.
Having random names would make this difficult.
Yeah. The random name for the hybrid Azure AD join scenario is a bit difficult, but you can use SCCM to bring the naming standard in line. Typically, I've seen this take about half an hour. So if you're building devices through autopilot, becoming hybrid join, once they hit SCCM and the compliance policy runs and then works out, the naming standard is non-compliant, and then it applies the correct naming standard. That can take half an hour, can take a bit longer depending on how often SCCM policy refreshes. But once all that is sorted out, all the names will synchronize up, and then you'll see the correct names in Intune, and then you can clear the names like later on in the future towards end of life. Also, the serial numbers. So you see the serial numbers in Intune as well. The serial numbers will never change. So even if the device name is something weird, if you know the serial number of the device you're retiring, then you can just sort by serial number and delete it that way.
Great stuff. Look, Ben snuck one final one in. We'll have to wrap up after that. Can a stolen autopilot device alert the admin of where it is, and how do we enable alerts?
No, so there's no location tracking on Windows 10 devices. In Intune, you can do location tracking with iOS devices. So if it's a fully managed iOS device, you can actually do location tracking with that. There's no location tracking with Windows 10 and Android as well. So if a device does get stolen, you can do a remote wipe. So the next time that device sees the internet, it will just say, oh, hey, I'm supposed to remote wipe, and it will just do a factory reset. Unfortunately, then you've lost the device, but at least you know that the data has been wiped. And of course, you've got other things as well you can apply, such as BitLocker encryption and things like that, to keep your devices secure if they go walkabout.
Yeah, and there's some third-party tools in that space too, right, from a number of vendors. I know that we use some of our government contracts. We use some of those tools that are embedded in the BIOS to actually to track the device's location if they're stolen. So we can certainly help with that as well.
Yeah.
All right, thanks again, Noel. Thanks, team, and thank you everybody on the call. Very much appreciate your time. I hope you got some value from the session today. Please give us your feedback so that we can continue to do these for you. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.